start with that.
You mentioned Kandahar. To what extent is the Marja campaign a dress rehearsal for an operation in Kandahar? You can see on its face Kandahar is a much larger, more complicated place. How different will it be, and to what extent does this lead you to that?
I think it does serve to a degree as a smaller scale preparatory operation. It also, however, continues operations that began last summer, just as I was arriving. So we are continuing a work that needed to be continued anyway. So we'd have done this. But it serves the model that Ambassador Sedwill laid out so well. It serves us to work many of the aspects of the model in preparation for Kandahar, which you're right, is much larger, much more complex.
Order of magnitude, how much larger?
Well, a lot.
But it's also worth just remembering with Kandahar and other places, in Marja we're virtually starting from scratch because the area was completely out with the government's control. And as General McChrystal says, so much so there was a Taliban flag flying there. And that isn't the case in Kandahar or elsewhere, where many of the institutions of the state are already in place and where the power balances are much more finely balanced than they were in Marja. And so, although the scale of the challenge is sort of broader in one sense, the depth of the challenge is less. And we just need to remember that's going to, those things are going to vary as we move around the country.
Sir, can I ask you about the drug lords and the narcotics problem there? How does that fit into the overall campaign in Marja? And then to expand that to all of the problems?
Certainly. Marja had become an area that attracted a traditional amount of, or a significant amount of the drug, both growth of poppies, but also production, narco-traffickers and whatnot. So getting security and governance back there is the way that we attack that problem long term, because you can never, in my view, reduce the narco problem unless you get governance and rule of law there, which requires security to prep that. So to the degree that it is going to help in that, I think it's going to be critical. That, what they were doing in Marja can move. I mean, clearly, they can pick that up and move. So I'm not saying that we are wiping out something that's not transferable. But as we spread security, I think it makes it more difficult for them to find places to do that. And also there's a cost in trying to relocate poppy production and trafficking.
And Mr. Ambassador, what does that do for the rule of law? Do you have courts going in right behind these folks to try drug lords?
Well, I think this again goes to this question of the essentially the abuse of power, because a lot of the poppy is just grown by small farmers, but they didn't really have many other choices. And one of the most difficult issues we're going to face here is tackling that. We're not going to be able to remove all of these people, get them all banged up into prison. It's simply not that kind of country. And of course, as in most countries that have gone through conflict, you have to accept that people who've been responsible for crimes of various kinds in the past have to have a place in the political settlement thereafter. And it's unsavoury in many ways, but it's just a fact of life. So one of the issues that President Karzai was talking to us about just yesterday when he was there was how do we manage that without allowing them to regain their power over the area. As General McChrystal said, security is critical. If you look at Helmand and the reduction in poppy production over the last couple of years, it's been dramatic in the secure areas. It's been over a third in the secure areas. It's actually gone up by a bit in the insecure areas, and that is very close. In terms of the justice sector, this is probably one of the areas where Afghan government capability is least mature. And there just isn't the capacity, literal capacity, numbers of lawyers and judges and so on, to provide the kind of state-run justice that is necessary countrywide. And therefore, one of the big challenges for us is to mesh together traditional justice systems using shuras, village shuras, district shuras and so on, which have a lot of legitimacy among the population for resolving disputes but also dealing with criminal offences into the state system. And there's been some work done on that. But I think that's going to be a theme for us as, again, the campaign moves across the south and east over the next year.
General, as the civilian contingents build up, and right now they're rather small in the marginalized area, what kind of role does the military have to play in getting governments set up? And how does that because they're going to be going on for months?
Sure. The military really enables the environment that allows that, and early that enabling is significant because there are not many civilian elements in. So military efforts will try to fill vacuum and help set up the beginning parts of the governance. For security to come in, we start with the Afghan National Army and coalition forces. We have also brought in Afghan National Civil Order Police, which are national police, and have a higher level of credibility with the people. That will transition to Afghan National Police, which will be permanent in that area. But what they do is all throughout that period, and that will last for a very long time, to maintain significant security so the people don't feel threatened, we'll do whatever it takes to help set up the organs of governance and whatnot, but allow the civilian component to fill that vacuum as quickly as it can so that we don't leave a vacuum, but at the same time, we, in fact, enable the civilians to come in as opposed to anything competitive.
Phil Stewart from Reuters. One of the things that the Secretary said he was going to talk to you about on this trip was the plans for Kandahar. And we were wondering a bit about whether this would be kind of there'd be a lot of sudden troop movements, is this going to be a kind of a gradual? If Marja was a sudden operation where there was no presence, then how would that model fit to, can you just speak in a bit more detail to answer other question, how would that model fit to Kandahar where there is a presence? I mean, maybe it won't look anything like Marja, it'll be a gradual build-up of you've seen some reporting about it. But what do you at this point what the thinking is?
Yeah, militarily it will not look much like Marja. We already have Afghan forces and coalition forces partnered with them inside Kandahar. And we have forces around what they call the environs of Kandahar. Those are those districts, Arghandab, Zari, Panjwai, Dand. Those are the districts that traditionally control Kandahar. Kandahar has not been under Taliban control. It's been under a menacing Taliban presence, particularly in the districts around it. So what we are doing now is we have already put additional forces in the districts around Kandahar, but we'll be able to reinforce that significantly over time. So there won't be a D-Day that is climactic. It will be a rising tide of security as it comes. At the same time, I'd like the ambassador to talk because actually slightly ahead of that needs to be a lot of preparatory work for governance.
Yeah, just to make the same point. Just as in Marja, what we need to do is bring the local people into both having a sense of ownership of the government agenda, but also having some control and influence over it. And that's uneven and patchy at the moment in the Kandahar area. Certain groups are well represented, other tribal groups feel disenfranchised, and of course that tension tends to fuel resentment and grievance and thus the insurgency. And so a lot of this shaping in the case of Kandahar, because it is a more complex human environment, will be political in advance, drawing in various tribal leaders and elders, setting up shuras in advance, and ensuring therefore that we're doing the things that we're now doing in Marja, having got the ability to do so, we can start doing in Kandahar well in advance of any build-up of the military and security effort, and the two will go very much hand in hand. So as the General says, there won't be a D-Day. What you'll see is hopefully gradually rising both security and governance in that area.
Just a quick follow-up, how many troops are in Kandahar and the districts now, and where do you see that at in 6 months from now?
Yeah,
or at least now?
Yeah, I'll have to come back and get you. It's a significant number of. There's Task Force Kandahar, Canadian-led, which we put American forces under that. So they have several battalions now, but we'll increase that significantly. And one further point, sometimes if you read history, in guerrilla wars particularly, and I'm not saying this is a guerrilla war, but the conventional forces or the counterinsurgents will try to draw the insurgents or the guerrillas into a set-piece battle so they can destroy them. That's not what we're trying to do. And in Marja, we were not trying to do that either. In fact, we were trying, if possible, to take Marja without a fight or with as little fighting as possible. We want the Afghan people to see that the approach of security does not necessarily mean that it'll be a set-piece battle in their neighborhood. And we also want the insurgents, if we can, to push them out so they can make career decisions when they're pushed out into areas away from the population, hopefully making a decision to reintegrate.